Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome back to my channel. So today we are diving deep into Neville Goddard's states of consciousness so that you can really simplify the concept and understand what in the hell he meant by you don't get what you want, you get what you are conscious of being. So we've already covered the law of assumption and feeling is the secret in other videos, which I'll link. And today we're going to dive into the states of consciousness because they essentially expand on both of those other videos, right? So this is like sort of, I don't know if I would call it the core of his work, but I definitely think from my experience working through Neville's concepts and content and his way of explaining reality creation and manifestation, it's really, I mean, especially, as a master NLP practitioner, right? I misunderstood the states of consciousness to be these transient emotional states that we find ourselves in, right? Like if you're excited to go on holiday, or like, someone cuts you off in traffic and then suddenly you're like angry and like, going through a little bit of road rage, or right, these emotional states that we find ourselves in NLP. We often talk about how we can change state or break state, right? And get you out of your tears, get you out of your road rage and help you reframe things and get you back into a more resourceful state. But along my own personal and professional journey, I have discovered that states of consciousness are more an identity level position, right? Like a way of being. It's really our self-concept. And all of what I call it's like your self-concept is like a bundle of identities that are largely created or that you have injected or taken on or identified with pre-verbal, right? Like before you could even speak, right? This is your name. This is your religion. This is how you are supposed to act. You're not allowed to speak up when, you're not allowed to express your emotions or however you were brought up in your system. So that's, like pre-verbal. Before you could even like speak for yourself, you were told how to be and how to act and how to feel and how to think and all the things. And so if you really think about it, right, a lot of the self-concept that you have been operating from was largely unconscious, happening, it was informed pre-verbal and happening within your family system that had very particular nuances and ways that you were taught to speak and to act and to feel and to ultimately be in the world. And now as an adult, right, when you are essentially repeating certain patterns or experiencing things like, little hiccups in your manifestation or reality creation efforts, right? Whether you call it manifestation or not, ultimately, like we as adults are trying to change certain things in certain areas of our lives, right? Those results that you are ultimately seeking and looking to generate and create in your reality consciously, more consciously, right, than not, which is first of all a valiant effort because most of the people out there like are so unconscious and not even aware of the fact that we do create our own reality, right? So we're already ahead of the curve in that way. But then, you find these hiccups, and especially like, a lot of the clients that come to me have already tried all the things, whether it's around reality creation, manifestation, or the self-help, visualization, affirmations, meditation, they've tried therapy, they've tried counseling, they've tried other coaching. And one of the main reasons that understanding Neville's concept around states of consciousness is so profound is when you really look at it from the fact that it is speaking to your, what I call your identity level position. So the states of consciousness that result from your self-concept and all of the identities that make up that self-concept ultimately yield what you assume to be true about yourself and the world and others and how it's going to be, right? You just assume that that's just the way things are going to go. So if you had a very traumatic upbringing, or you were taught, to people please and to, speak only when spoken to, or to keep your mouth shut and to not express your emotions because that wasn't manly enough, or whatever the thing is, right? That you were taught, again, largely unconsciously. And remember that, like, this was all pre-verbal, oftentimes in utero, and potentially, like we dealing with and up against patterns that, came from our ancestors. And, like we're not even aware that our parents are dealing with their own shit and their own upbringing, their own family systems, right? Which is why I do a lot of systemic family constellation work, because you have to transcend the self-concept and all the identities that you are so identified with that you don't even realize that you're so unconscious that you are operating from, that are resulting in these states of consciousness, right? And they're not even beliefs, right? These are identity level positions about who you assume you are without even questioning it. And if you don't question, right, your self-concept and start to unpack and unpick these identities and start to become aware of them and get space from them, it's going to be really difficult to actually break through any limitations or barriers or repetitions or patterns or addictions or anything that actually feels safe for your nervous system and familiar and comfortable. Because again, that is protecting your sense of self and your sense of self, your self-concept, etc. Now we get into like, ego wants to maintain itself. It doesn't want to be annihilated. And so when you really start to understand the states of consciousness as an identity level position, it's what in my language, in my world, I call identity one of the highest leverage points of change. Because if you are wanting to change anything in your external environment or reality, right, you have to access the highest leverage point in order to change that. And our environment, our resulting environment that we find ourselves in, is actually old energy, which is why I teach people how to access the energetics, because the energetics are things like our thoughts and our emotions, energy and motion, our actions, our words, and all of the identities, right? All of the values, the beliefs that make up, that correspond to those different identities, because everything is ultimately energy, right? Energy is informing and animating us, guiding us, etc. And one of the highest leverage points of change are identities, because our identities inform, right, who we think we are, what we need to be in the world. And that's why we have multiple identities, right? We're not just one thing, but sometimes there is one identity, one piece of our self-concept that overrides and that trumps all of the others. And that's just the dominant state of consciousness that we find ourselves in, and the way that we then assume things are going to work out. And an even higher leverage points of change than identity is what I call your soul state. And when you tune in, tap in, and turn on to your soul state, that is ultimately where you have access to infinite possibilities and potentiality, because ultimately your soul is the first point of differentiation of energy, right? Like source of energy is ultimately like the source of everything. And I'm going to avoid using the word God, because there is so much misinterpretation, misidentification about God, right? There's too many like man-made, essentially, religions that talk about God in a very different way than I'm referring to it right now. So there is a source, like even transcending gods, right? A God. For example, like some people have an identity of being an atheist, right? So then what do we do? Like, so it's not about being Christian, it's not about being Jewish, it's not about being Islam or an atheist or any of the others, right? Because those are just identities that we all have. So I'm even saying we have to transcend those identities, and then we get to our soul state. But even above soul state, right, is the source of everything, which is ultimately where it's just pure potentiality, pure energy in its essential state. And there is ultimately at that level, like it's no thing. That's why quantum physics tells us that, like, when they look deep inside elements or even physical matter and seemingly physical objects, when they keep drilling down, everything is ultimately 99.999% empty space, because ultimately energy is no thing. It's nothing. And so that is the highest leverage point of change, right? Is just the source of energy, source of all things, source of everything. But at its source, it is no thing. And it's important to recognize that, because it's not just nothing, it's infinite potentiality. It's the wave function from a quantum physics point of view, where everything is possible, and it's got its infinite potentiality, right? And then when we start to have consciousness, right, states of consciousness is where Neville's work really starts to kind of get overlaid here. When we have states of consciousness, or we start to differentiate, start to observe the wave, that's when we get particles, right? And we get charged particles, the positive, the negative, the right, the wrong, and all the different variations of positive and negative, right, wrong, good, bad, better, worse, etc. And then like a something, right? So we go from a no thing, nothing, to a something. And a something is like, something has to have an identity, a phone, a lip ice, a carry, a you, a computer, a microphone, or whatever. All the infinite potentialities of energy start to come into physicality, into physical form. So when you have when you're looking at the physical environment and reality that you're finding yourself in, it is the lowest leverage point of change, because it's old energy that has already been consciously or unconsciously directed, right, and brought into physicality. And so what happens, right, in the like traditional self-help world out there, where like, everyone's teaching habits and, change your habits, change your behaviors, etc., including Neville, right? He talks about like how you have to get into the habit of being someone, into a new state of being, into a new state of consciousness. But for me, that was quite misleading, because for me, the next leverage point above environment, which for me is the lowest, right, is the level of behavior and action and words, using words and actions. And most people, and that's the level of habits, right? Like you go out and you have a morning routine, or what's a routine? It's where you do different things, or when you say different things. But if you think about it, like when you've gone out and tried to change your habits or take on new habits, it's like, okay, well, you're conscious of them. It's like, it's logical, it's rational to do the new thing. And so it begs the question, okay, like, well, if you are not following through on this new habit, like, well, what's informing the behavior or the action that you're supposed to take or not take? So then it begs the question, right? Like, why are you not able to put these new habits into place? And that usually speaks to another higher leverage points of change, which is your capabilities. And capabilities is whether you are like literally like able-bodied to do the thing, or if you are skilled in it, capability from a skill point of view. And then there's a third one, which speaks to willingness. Like you might be able-bodied, you might be skilled in it, you might know how to, like eat healthily, cook, different healthy meals, but you might not be willing to do it. So then it's like, okay, what's the willingness speak to? That's another higher leverage point of change, which is the belief. So now it's like, well, I don't believe that it's important enough. So importance is now speaking to the level of value. So beliefs are informed by what we think is important to us, and values are informed by our identities, and our identities are informed by our soul states and our self-concept, and like how we've been brought up. And again, it's largely unconscious that we have taken on these identities. And even if we are conscious of our identities, right? Like maybe you have an identity of that you're a new parent, or you're expecting to become a parent, or you already are a parent. Those identities are going to have corresponding values, which will then have corresponding beliefs about, what's right and wrong and good and bad and better and worse, etc., about children and raising children and parenting, etc. And then now we start to see, okay, well, like you and your partner may have the same identity of a parent, right? Because you have a child together. But now, like maybe your identities, right, as parents, you might have different values, and those values may bump up against each other. Or, your identity as a parent might bump up against your partner's identity of like, wanting to climb the corporate ladder and like be really accomplished in their career. And so those two identities are now potentially at odds with each other. So when I talk about the energetics, right, being able to access the energetics, it's these intangible like things. I don't know what else to call them other than the energetics. It's like these intangible things that inform us, that inform our behavior and the actions that we take or not take, and the words that we use or not use, and the resulting environment that we find ourselves in, right? And it's the intangible things like your values and your beliefs and your identities and your self-concept. It's like, what the fuck? We've never been taught to unwrap and unravel like who we think we are and how we, how our resulting reality gets created. And so when we really think about Neville's states of consciousness and how he was referring to these identity level positions, it is a very, in my words, high leverage point of change. So when you start to understand the states of consciousness that you're operating from and how those states of consciousness are coloring and cascading down, right, what you believe about yourself and what you value, what's important to you, without you even probably being conscious of it, without you even having questioned it, is where the rubber meets the road, right? Because when you start to become more conscious of it and you start to tie things together and see the correlation between your self-concept, your identities, and your state of consciousness and the resulting assumptions that you have about, the world and how things are going to work out or how your relationships are going to be or whatever the thing is, that's really where like your actual manifestation capability skyrockets and goes through the roof, because now you can manifest with ease and speed and consistency because you now know, right? Like, and it can be just a subtle, word, like a word track, of like, if you were taught when you were growing up to, to never speak until spoken to. And so your identity that was shaped, because remember, identity is at the level, the language, the linguistics of the I am, right? It's the verb to be. So it's, it doesn't always have to, it's like either something you believe you are or potentially that you're not. So like sometimes, my clients have been brought up with an identity that they're like a piece of shit or that they are not worthy, right? They're not worthy of, so you can see that those two identities, I am a piece of shit, right? Like, because sometimes that's just, the way that they have perceived the experience or have actually heard that language from their caregivers, which is unfortunate, right? These are the little traumas and big traumas that we have to navigate and sort of untangle and, transcend. And so what happens is when you are operating from the identity of like, I am a piece of shit, and you're not even conscious that you're still carrying that word track or that identity, that self-concept around with you, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to really understand why you keep attracting people that confirm that back to you in your external reality, because your reality, like Neville says, reflects back your state of being and who you essentially are. Neville always says, you don't get what you want, you get what you are conscious of being. And so many of us are largely unconscious. It's not our fault. It's just because, right, we've never gone to consciousness school. And so, right, like I am a piece of shit or I am not worthy. It's just like, it's still the I am not is still an identity that you're taking on. And so then you're going to reflect relationships, experiences, and situations that are going to reflect back to you that you are not worthy. So no matter how hard you try, like you're going to potentially reach a ceiling in your career or your money or your relationships, etc. And eventually you'll have the experience to confirm that you are in fact not worthy, because that's the identity, that's a state of consciousness that you largely unconsciously operate from. So it's not right or wrong or good or bad or better or worse. It's just that it is what it is. They were words that people used. They were words that you used. And guess what? The good news is that you can change your words. You can change your self-concept. You can change who you are, because at your essence, right? Tune in, tap in, turn on your soul state. Your soul is not a piece of shit. Your soul is not worthy. Your soul has nothing that's missing. Your soul is infinite. It is vital. It's abundant. It's intact, right? So we just have to go and discover and like untangle and unravel and dissolve all of the lies that you have taken on, that you are operating from. So here's what you can start to play with, right? The first thing is that, okay, and this is important, even though I say that identity is the lowest leverage point of change because it's old energy that's already manifested, it's already, right, come into existence. Your environment actually is the first place to look for clues about what your self-concept and what your dominant states of consciousness are ultimately saying about you. Because if you keep having relationships, and this is where people do a lot of spiritual bypassing, they try and avoid the positive, they try and avoid the negative and seek the positive. And this is where I talk a lot about in my other videos, not just in the Neville Goddard series, but I talk a lot about why this can be a really detrimental practice in the self-help world, about like seeking positivity and being high vibe all the time, because it's not natural, right? And it promotes a practice of like not looking at your reality, your physicality that has actually come into your environment, your current like state. What is currently happening for you? Are you repeating patterns? Are you, addicted to certain emotional states or relationships or things that are not actually working for you? Like, looking at all of that stuff doesn't mean anything additional about you. It doesn't mean you're wrong, you're bad, you're broken, you're missing, you're like, right? It just means that this is the old, outdated self-concept that we can now upgrade. And it's like, yay. But most people, right, to have all this added shame and blame and guilt and regret, and like they add all these other layers of thoughts and emotions onto it, which then prevent them from actually looking at it. And there's nothing actually wrong with looking at it in your current environment and being like, shit, actually, like I've repeated the same fucking relationship or experience or experience now for like the third time, second time, fifth time, 100th time, whatever. Don't judge, just notice and observe, and now be like, okay, so, and then reverse engineer, be like, okay, so what is this relationship saying about myself that I've never even considered? What is it assumed? Like, what am I unconsciously assuming that has now resulted? Maybe it's that, like that you're not worthy and that you're a piece of shit because people keep treating you like that. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know what yours is going to be, but that's obviously why I created the Aligned Living Collective, so that you can get your energies into alignment with your soul state and with what's actually infinitely possible for you. And you can start to look at these things and start to gain some space and objectivity from the self-concept, the identities, and the states of consciousness that you're ultimately operating from, and that are not working for you, right? And it's again, like, please, if you take anything out of this, is stop judging you for whatever you have created, right? Whatever is currently in your reality. Like, I get it that you might be experiencing challenges and traumas and, like repeated patterns and things, or addictions or whatever, like things that you are not happy with, and that you might, and you might be really happy in whatever you've got, and you might be like, oh, I've got so many amazing things and relationships and in all areas of my life, except I don't have this, or I want more of this, or whatever. And that's also okay. Like, either situation is okay. You are okay. You're not missing anything. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. We just need to dissolve all of the lies, all the limitations that you have largely unconsciously taken on. And we just need to get you to become more conscious so that you can access the energetics that you're operating from, which is going to cultivate your energy intelligence. And when you become more intelligent, what do we know? We know that you can be, do, and have anything in any area of your life that you want with greater ease and speed and consistency, aka manifestation. So that's why I don't really teach like, manifestation techniques. I teach you energy intelligence and how to access the energetics, and essentially how to know yourself inside and out better than you've ever known yourself, so that you can change yourself, because you are not just yourself, right? You are ultimately like your soul state. And even beyond that, like, we are all just energy intermingling and interconnected and all the things. But that's not very helpful, right? To stay in that realm, because yes, we are energetic beings, but I always say that we are energetic beings having a human experience, and this human experience is as important as the energetic realm. And that's why I love, helping you to align your energies so that you can have a beautiful human experience. And it's not gonna, when you're in alignment, it doesn't mean that like you're not gonna experience challenges and traumas and, wobbles, but like when you can become more energy intelligent, when you can understand the energetics that are operating and are at play, obviously you can align your energies much faster, and you don't have to wobble with all of the shit that's actually happening on the outside or even on the inside. So my beautiful friend, I hope that this has helped you to really understand states of consciousness a little bit more cleanly and easily. And I would love to have you in the Aligned Living Collective, because this is where I really dive deep with my peeps. And it's the place where I do all my coaching and my systemic family constellation, so that we can go and untangle and dissolve all of the ancestral, generational, intergenerational energies that are potentially influencing you, and all the things, right? There are so many fun things that we do in there. So I'd love to have you join. Link will be in the description. Subscribe if you haven't already, so that you can come find me again. Hit the notification bell so that you know when the next video lands, and share some love and comments, and I'll see you in the next one.